I'm not talking about all metal guns. I am specifically talking about guns that were designed with a polymer frame that for some reason nowadays have a metal frame. They're touting that they have all these benefits like reduced felt recoil, less muzzle rise. In the past 2.5 years, I have tested 5 of these guns and only one of them has actually delivered on that promise. The first hybrid metal gun that I tested was the Rock Island Armory STK 100. It is essentially a metal framed hybrid of the Glock 17. It comes in at 28.8 ounces in weight, whereas a Gen 5 Glock 17 comes in at about 22 ounces. During my review in 2021 of that gun, I said it was one of the worst handguns that I had tested thus far that year. Like literally the first range trip, I couldn't even get through an entire mag, front sight fell off. Front sight came loose. The other thing that was weird about it was the frame had this split design to it. It was basically 2 hemispheres that were bolted together, which wasn't the biggest deal in the world, but the lines on the seam between the 2 halves just didn't look very clean. The third problem that I had with it was, although the grip seemed to be very nicely textured, once you started sweating, it started slipping. And some of the grooves on the back strap seemed to slide instead of helping you grip. The other criticism I had about it was, although it came optics ready from the factory, it only would fit a Vortex red dot, which I thought was odd. I thought that they should give it, at the bare minimum, an RMR cut so they could fit more than just Vortex optics on it, or at least some kind of modular optics, but they didn't. The other interesting thing about the STK 100 was the twist rate of the barrel. You see, most Glock 19 or Glock 17 barrels are a 1 in 10 twist rate, and the STK 100 had a 1 in 16 twist rate. I didn't really even think about this until I was at the indoor range shooting at paper at about 30 feet, and I noticed a bunch of holes in the paper where the bullets had tumbled, and I thought that was kind of weird because why are they tumbling at such a short distance? But my biggest criticism of the STK 100 was the price tag when it was released. When they first came out, they were going for about $650-ish. I even saw them for $750 on some other websites. I just felt they were way overpriced for what they were. Now, some good things about the STK 100. Number one, aside from that front sight flying off, I didn't have any malfunctions at all. It ran 100% reliably. The other thing about it was it did, in the hand, feel like there was a little bit less perceived recoil than the polymer handguns. However, if you take a look at this slow motion footage of my Gen 5 Glock 17 versus the STK 100, I drew lines across here so you could see where the barrel starts when I press the trigger, and then I have a maximum height. And if you look at it close enough, it's almost negligible. I can't really see much of a difference between the recoil in regards to muzzle flip. One of the things though that I found about the STK 100 that I just really didn't like was because the frame was made of metal, you didn't really have many options if the texture wasn't enough for you and you wanted to increase the texture. Basically your only options were to add grip tape. But because it was made of metal, you couldn't do any stippling or get the grip recontoured like you could with a polymer grip. Now, in Rock Island Armory's defense, since the gun has been released, they did reduce the MSRP from $650 down to $450. And I think at $450, it might be worth it, depending on who you are and what you want to do with it. So about a year after I reviewed the STK 100, I got this guy from a company called Matrix Arms. This is called the MX-19, and I was initially insanely excited to review this because it solved some of the problems that I found with the STK 100. For example, one of the problems I had with metal grips is if the texture or ergos suck, you can't do much about it. But this one came with 2 grip modules. And so this one has polymer grip modules that go around a metal frame. It has one that's less aggressive and one that's more aggressive. And I thought that was going to be kind of awesome. And the other reason that this excited me was they come in a ton of different configurations and different colors. And within those configurations, they come in at different pricing points, which we'll get to here in a second. However, I've had this gun now for almost a year, and I'm just now getting around to reviewing it because this gun has had more problems than any other handgun that I've ever tested on this channel before. The first problem I ran into was when I first received this and I saw that it had another grip that you could change out. I wanted to take that grip off and put another one on just to see what the experience was like. And in order to change the grip, you have to remove the magazine release. And so I removed the magazine release, got the grip off, put the new one on, and then when I went to go reinsert the magazine release, the spring for the magazine release was pushed down, and I couldn't get it to catch in the little mag catch for the magazine release. And then I started looking at it a little closer because I couldn't understand why it wouldn't catch. Turns out there is a tunnel on the bottom of the grip. You have to push something down in there to push back up. I'll show you using a different frame, but down in here is where that spring goes for your magazine release. And so this one on the MX-19, you can simply push it up, but it can also come back down. That spring went down in the tunnel and I couldn't get it to lock back into this magazine release. Thought that was really odd. It wasn't a big deal, but it's something I've never seen in any Glock clones before. But fortunately, once I was able to push that spring back up, I was able to get it all back together and head to the range. Now, once I got to the range and I started shooting this, I started running into a handful of different problems. The first problem I ran into was what I'm gonna call a delayed reset. All right, first shots with the Matrix Arms MX-19. So let's just see how it functions. My trigger didn't reset, that's weird. Okay, now the trigger's resetting. So the trigger, it's hanging on something. It has a delayed reset, watch.
It's not the shaky sit, what is that? Oh, yeah.
It literally just comes out by itself. Oh.
Ah, and it choked again.
Just get this freaking thing to work. Can't shoot fast, that's for sure. So I couldn't get the gun to really run that day at the range, so I brought it home and I attempted to take this apart. And if you know anything about Glocks or Glock clones, they are notoriously the easiest guns to disassemble, repair, or diagnose, or clean, or whatever. I could not get this guy apart for the life of me. Now, in order to take a Glock apart, you just have to push out this trigger pin and push out the backstrap pin, and you should be able to pull all the parts out. However, I tried pushing out the trigger pin and it wouldn't move. Then I moved to a hammer and punch. It wouldn't budge. So I messaged the guys over at Matrix Arms and said, hey guys, I'm having this problem with the gun. I wanna take it apart. Why can't I get this pin out? And they kindly responded and said, hey, you know, if you're having problems, just send it back to us, we'll fix it. And I said, oh, I really appreciate that. But the point is, for Glocks, you should be able to take them apart. Why can't I take it apart? And so they said, well, we decided to do a press fit trigger pin. It made zero sense to me. And so basically what they were telling me was, if you bought this gun and you had a problem with it, the only way to repair it or the only way to get your trigger clean and do a deep clean was to send the gun back to them to have them remove the pin, which they said they would do at no charge, even for customers. But that's not the point. The point of a Glock clone is you're able to work on them very easily. So I found a steel dowel and I used my vise over there and I was able to finally press out that pin. I don't know how much pressure it took to push that pin out, but I almost broke my vise. In fact, I bent it a little bit. Once I got it out, I started noticing some other things about the trigger that shouldn't have been. So to kind of illustrate what I mean, this is how the Timney Alpha trigger kind of works. This little piece here sets down into the trigger and this little screw holds it. So if you look down in here, there's supposed to be a screw that holds this whole thing into the trigger housing. It's not tightened up right now, but that screw should have been there when I took that gun apart and it wasn't. For reference, this is how smooth the Timney trigger bar should be. You notice I'm rubbing this tool across, listen. This is the one that was inside of this MX-19. I don't know if you can see the lines or not. There you go, you can probably see that. Listen. So once I got that screw back into the trigger housing that should have been there in the first place and I went back to the range, I was able to finally shoot this gun without the trigger sticking. But I ran into another problem. So I've taken this guy apart. Hopefully we fixed the issues. I'm not 100% sure. OEM magazine, brass, factory new, 9mm. Let's see how it does. Ah! Yeah, see, my hand barely bumps it. Ugh. Stop doing that. I can't grip lower because then I can't control recoil. But the good news is the trigger is now resetting. All right, now we're gonna try aluminum cased ammo. Ooh, had another little issue there. It looks like a failure to extract. Prematurely. I'm gonna have to let you shoot this. Oh, same thing, failure to extract. I wanna see if I can just get through one magazine without prematurely locking open or without a malfunction, because it's yet to happen. Nope, premature lock open. Well, I had one premature lock open, but like that's just me adjusting my grip to a position that's just not natural for me to shoot in. This gun has another flaw with it that causes people to have premature slide lock. I thought it was just me because I do tend to ride my support hand kind of high, and sometimes I do bump slide releases. And so I'm not a fan of the extended slide releases, which is what this came with. But I had already switched that out because once I see an extended slide release on a Glock, I just take it off and put a normal one on because I know I'm gonna bump it. But I let my buddy Mike from the Tactical Considerations YouTube channel. And the reason I wanted him to shoot it was he actually prefers extended controls on his Glocks. Oh, premature, same. No, you got it, there you go.
That's weird, I don't ever do that on Glocks.
Extended.
That's odd. I don't think I've done that. I have extended controls on all my Glocks, and I don't do that.
Yeah.
Because you hate shooting my Glocks because they all have extended controls.
Yeah. Now the reason this gun gets premature slide lock is because they failed to add a feature that every other Glock and Glock clone has. So if you look at any OEM Glock or any Glock clone, you'll always notice there's this little ridge that's below the slide release. And that is to prevent your support hand under recoil from barely jumping up and knocking that up under recoil while the gun's cycling, so you don't get premature lock up. You can see here, P80 has it on their frames. This SCT has it on their frame. Shadow Systems has it on their frame. Palmetto State Armory has it on theirs. And for some strange reason, a company that makes a metal Glock clone that doesn't have that. And that's why I've only been able to get through about 3 magazines without a premature slide lock. Also that day, I ran into another issue. This gun won't accept anything but Gen 3 magazines. It won't accept any Gen 5 magazines, and it also limits what types of mag extensions you can use because it has this stupid little grip down here that has this little protrusion in the rear and a protrusion in the front. So all of my mag extensions that I typically like to carry won't work with this gun. And then the only mag extensions that will work with it are the Arc Division ones, which don't get me wrong, those are great, but if I hadn't had those mag extensions laying around, I would just be shooting with flush mags or just extended Glock 17 mags. So once I got back from the range that day, I sent a message to the guys over at Matrix Arms and I said, hey, I'm gonna send this gun to you because I just cannot even get through an entire magazine on here without having any problems. And so I sent it off to them. About 3 weeks later, it returned. And when I got it back, I don't know what they did to it, but one thing they did do was they got rid of that stupid trigger pin, and now they have a threaded trigger pin that comes out a lot easier. So you will be able to take them apart now. But I went back to the range, and guess what? Well, at least I got through a mag for the very first time. Yeah, spoke too soon. Still malfunctions. Yeah, did it again. Of the 500 or 600 rounds that I have put through this gun, I have another problem with it. It doesn't shoot any better or any flatter or any more reliable than a stock Glock or some kind of Glock clone. This gun cost on the low side at $1,500 and on the high side at about $1,600. And I put it up against this, which is an SCT frame. I will have links for this stuff over at the parts list if you want to check it out. I put this whole thing together, minus the trigger and the magwell, for $4.99. This gun literally costs 3 times as much. If you look at the slow motion footage, you're gonna see that this gun not only shoots flatter, but I can shoot this gun much faster than I can this one. Overall, I just have to say that this gun is just not worth the price point. It has so many limitations on it. It has so many cons about it. It won't even run completely right. And I even sent this back to them to have them make sure that everything was good on here, and we still can't get this to run right. And it's not just me, even Mike from Tactical Considerations can't get the gun to run either. Maybe there are some models of this that people are having great luck with. I'm just not having great luck with it. The next metal gun that I started getting experience with was the M&P 2.0 metal. You might remember when these came out. If you know me and you watch my channel, you'll know that the M&Ps are some of my favorite guns, especially when they got to the 2.0. And recently with the 2.0s, regardless if they're polymer or if they're metal, they now have a way better trigger in them than they used to have. Because one of the biggest downsides to M&Ps in the past was, although they were fantastic guns, one of the first things you wanted to do was to throw an Apex trigger in it, or you wanted to throw in an Overwatch precision trigger. Thankfully nowadays, although I love those triggers, I'm not in a rush to do so. So it's good to see that Smith & Wesson is listening to their customer base. Now, the M2.0 metal comes in 2 variants. You have the standard size, which is essentially a 4¼ inch barrel, full-sized magazine, and then they have the Performance Center model, which is a ported version, and you can get that one in 2 different color variants, either in the titanium silver like this one, or you can get the titanium silver frame with the black slide. Now, I have compared this really closely with my polymer version of this gun, and aside from the color and the metal frame, there's nothing different about these. However, these cost a heck of a lot more money than these do. And I will say this, of the metal guns that we have talked about so far in this video, this one has been 100% the most reliable. I've had 0 issues with it in regards to the way it functions. However, it does tend to have a couple of cons. Con number 1, when I got this M&P 2.0, I got the optics ready version. This gun was only about $540, and it came with suppressor height sights already included with it. And I thought that was a really good deal, because now you don't got to worry about going and finding sights when you want to have something to co-witness with on your red dot. This gun cost $300 more than that one. Although it came with the upgraded trigger, it did not come with suppressor height sights, and I could not find any Smith & Wesson branded M&P suppressor height sights from Smith & Wesson themselves. So I resorted to getting some night vision sights. I love night vision sights. I'll have links to them over at the parts list if you want to check them out. But I had to spend an additional $100 on this gun just to make it similar to this one. These cost $7.99 when they first came out. These can be had for like $5.40. Plus I had to spend an additional $100. So we're kind of already starting off like, man, this thing better be good when we go to the range because it's so dang expensive. So at the range, it shoots almost just like any other M&P, except for one big mistake. You see, on the metal version, although it has the plastic grip panels on the back that are interchangeable and then a plastic insert on the front, they removed a lot of the texture from in between those. Whereas on the polymer version, there is plastic grips there. And if you look at the way you grip a handgun, I was kind of relying on those grips right there to keep my hands locked in place. And when they took that away, it made this gun a little bit more difficult to hang on to. So I did a little grip tape mod right here on it, and that seemed to eliminate the problem. But again, a gun that cost about $300 more than the polymer version, you shouldn't have to buy grip tape to put on it to make it just as good as the polymer version. The second thing that I noticed was the felt recoil was a lot more than on their polymer version. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the only difference between the metal and the polymer version is literally the frame. So when you weigh this against the polymer version, and that's only a 2.1 ounce increase in weight. That's not enough weight to help mitigate some felt recoil. And so when you look at this gun, although it's a great gun to shoot, it's fun to shoot, and you factor in, once you buy suppressor height sights and you pay the increased cost for the metal, this gun costs 69% more than the polymer counterpart. So I decided to get some slow motion footage of it so I could compare it to the recoil impulse and muzzle flip to the standard polymer version. And as you can see, the differences between the two are very negligible. If you look closely, it almost looks like I'm able to shoot the polymer one with less muzzle flip than I am on the metal one. And the reason behind that is a little thing called frame flex. If you look at this footage here, you can notice that polymer frames have flex to them. And this is a double-edged sword. Some people claim that the flexing of the frame can reduce the accuracy of the pistol. But the good thing about frame flex is a lot of that energy in the recoil is absorbed by the grip before it ever goes into your hand. And so you don't feel that shock of the recoil as much as you do with a metal gun. The problem we're seeing with the guns that we've talked about so far today is all of them have been aluminum gripped, which means they aren't heavy enough to justify getting rid of the frame flex. You see, with a heavier gun that has a steel frame, the frame is so heavy that although there isn't frame flex, that weight of the frame absorbs all of the energy from the recoil, so it still won't go through your hand. But when you take something that's super lightweight and get rid of the flex, it's kind of like hitting a baseball bat. If you remember playing Little League or anything, if you hit the ball on the wrong part of the bat, you'd feel that shock going through your hands and it hurt. That's similar to what shooting aluminum gripped pistols feels like for the most part. It seems at this point in the video, based on the metal guns that we've tested so far, that if someone would make a steel framed pistol, that would solve all of our problems, right? Well, I have one of those. And this one is made by the same people that made this one. I know, right? We're in for a ride. This one is called the MXI Invictus. And this is their quote unquote competition gun. And it is extremely heavy. This thing comes in at 40 ounces. But check this out. I noticed that they fixed a couple of the problems that I had on the OG version. Number one, it has that little lip there for the slide lock, slide release. Why couldn't they just add that to the original frame? The second thing they fixed is they don't have that weird little tactical foreskin looking thing to prevent you from using magazine extensions. The other thing they fixed is on the front here, they've actually added some checkering to the front strap. Nonetheless, I haven't had this gun very long and I don't have a ton of rounds through it, but I've got a couple hundred rounds through it so far. So don't take this portion of the video as a complete review on this one. Went to the range, put some range ammo through it. It shot 100% flawlessly. I've had zero malfunctions with it. I've had zero issues with the trigger not wanting to reset. I've had zero issues with premature slide lock, but there's another problem that I'm having with it. This gun does not feel like a 40-ounce race gun for competition. And the reason I say that is I have a couple of guns. This one's about 46 ounces. Now, obviously this one's comped, but look how flat this 2011 shoots. Let's take the Shadow 2, for example. This one has zero comps on it. This thing comes in at 43 ounces, and this one shoots way flatter than this one ever shot. In fact, once I was shooting it at the range, I just felt like I could shoot a polymer gun flatter and faster. So if you look at the slow motion footage right here, this is a Shadow Systems DR920L, AKA the Glock 34. And as you can see, if you look at the recoil impulse between the two, this 40-ounce gun has way more recoil and muzzle flip. And the most interesting thing about the DR920L is it weighs 22 ounces. You would expect with that kind of a weight difference that the muzzle flip should be a lot less because you got a lot more weight to absorb the recoil and you have a lot more weight to bring it back down a little bit faster. But as you can see, it doesn't matter. Now, at this point in the video, you're probably thinking to yourself, dude, you're not making any sense right now, because earlier you said that the reason that these aluminum framed guns that used to be polymer had so much more felt recoil and more muzzle rise was because they removed the frame flex but didn't add enough weight. Yet now you're telling me that you have a gun that has a steel frame that has enough weight to offset the lack of frame flex, yet it still doesn't shoot as flat as something that's heavy like this or something that's heavy like this. And that's because there is more to this equation than just increasing the weight. One thing you have to think about is balance. You see, guns like the CZ Shadow 2 or guns like 2011s were designed with metal frames, and they were designed with the weight, and they were designed in a way to have a different weight distribution. Because you got to think about balance, you can't simply add a lot of weight or a lot of mass to a pistol frame and expect it to shoot as a gun that was designed to be heavier. For example, if you take this CZ Shadow 2 frame with no magazine in there and without the slide on it, you'll see that when I put my finger in this trigger guard, it wants to fall forwards, which means it's kind of front heavy. When you take this Glock frame and do the same thing, it wants to fall backwards. There's too much weight in the rear, not enough in the front. Another factor that has to be considered is how much mass does the slide have? When you have a front heavy frame and a slide that doesn't have a lot of mass, you get a really flat shooting handgun. So far, we have learned that getting a hybrid version of a polymer gun where it has a metal frame have a few things in common. Increased cost by a high margin. Some of them tend to be less reliable. Increased felt recoil, especially on the aluminum frame models. And something I haven't mentioned yet, every single one of these, if you leave it on the tailgate of your truck and you're outside shooting, they get insanely hot to shoot. However, there is an anomaly to all of this. There are aluminum frames that can replace polymer frames that actually shoot flatter. I want you to understand something. This company didn't pay me to say these things. I don't get any kickbacks if you buy these things that I'm about to talk about. Literally, I'm just telling you what my experience is. If you decide to believe me, cool. If you don't, that's also cool. And that's gonna be these guys from a company called Icarus Precision. Now, Icarus Precision typically takes a frame that goes to a gun, whether it be a P320 or some kind of P365 variant, or in this case, the Zev OZ9. And what they do differently than every other company that we've talked about today is they increase not only the texture by a large margin, but they increase the ergonomics of it so that you can actually leverage parts of the frame, like these thumb ledges right here, to mitigate recoil. Nobody that we've talked about today that made a metal frame has even attempted to help people mitigate recoil. They've just taken their normal frame, made a metal version of it. I will give credit to the guys at Matrix Arms for doing this interchangeable grip. That's cool. But they did nothing in regards to a thumb ledge or anything like that. Now let me show you this footage real quick. I'm gonna show you some slow motion of the X Macro with its polymer grip versus the X Macro with this grip. The only difference between the two guns is the grip. And now what's interesting about that is this grip only weighs 2.2 ounces more than the polymer grip. And if you look at that footage, not only am I shooting that gun flatter, but I'm shooting it faster and I'm more accurate with the P365X Macro with this grip than I have been with any subcompact gun that I've ever shot in my life. I have an OZ9 right here and I have the standard OZ9 grips, and this grip combined with its thumb ledges, you're able to really hang on to this, and despite sweating and despite this being made of metal, your hands simply don't slip off. I even did a build a couple of months ago where I took an X Macro XL, put a shortened slide on it that was comped so that it was flush with the frame, and that thing shot phenomenally well. However, everything has a downside. These are expensive. I think the cheapest one I've seen is about $400. If that's worth it to you, cool. If it's not, that's also cool. I'm not telling you to go out and buy this. I'm just telling you what my experience is. The second problem is they're kind of hard to find in stock. And not only that, but they typically have long lead times if you do a pre-order. And the other downside is, especially with the X Macro, they still get hot if left in the sun or shooting a lot of rounds through them. I think the lesson to be learned today, it's not always about weight or material. It's about ergonomics and about surface area and friction between the hand and the grip. And I think if Icarus Precision made these out of polymer, not only would they be a lot cheaper, but they would be just as effective if they were polymer versus if they weren't. And a good example of what I'm talking about would be with this guy right here. This is the SCT frame, and it's essentially a Gen 3 Glock that I put together almost a year ago now, and I only spent $499 on it, like I mentioned earlier. But if you look at the ergonomics of this grip, when you first feel it, it almost feels uncomfortable, and then as you start shooting it, it melts into your hand. And I'm able to shoot this gun flatter than almost any of the other metal guns that we shot today, with the exception of the Icarus Precision. If you want to know more about this gun, check out this video right here. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But until next time, guys, I love you. You guys stay sexy.